Welcome back. We had some good questions at the break that I just wanted to review for those of you who are watching this at home. One of the questions was, we don't yet have some of these practices in place during our Eucharist or in some of our services. How do I go back to my vestry? How do I introduce some of these new practices without any of the parishioners being uncomfortable or feeling like they've been outed? So for example, if the chalice for the Eucharist has only been wine and the parish wants to offer non-alcoholic grape juice or wine in another chalice, how does one start that practice in their parish? And the short answer is the General Convention folks gave us resolutions. And so one of the benefits of watching this video or being part of this presentation today is that you can go back to your leadership and say, hey, guess what, guys? There are very specific expectations. There are very specific things that we need to incorporate into our service, our practices, our relationship with each other. They're in the resolutions, so we need to begin this practice sooner rather than later. And that way, we need to take care of parishioner Q, who is not able to receive the full Eucharist because of their relationship with alcohol. It can simply be the Church itself has said to us we need to begin to have these practices. The same is going to be true with conversations as we go forward. The resolutions say, General Convention says, please have this conversation. Have it. Whether it's with individuals or as a community at large, or if we spend the year looking at some of the ways that we relate to each other and how do we manage our existential anxiety, how do we manage relationships that we're not comfortable with, how do we manage loss, that's an entire year of conversation that has to do with what do I do when I want anesthesia, when I want to avoid. So that's the gift of resolutions and this presentation today. The other question was about the physicality of the disease process, of the addiction process, and we're going to be talking about that for the next hour or so. You'll see that we have use, abuse, and dependence. In my field, the psych field, we have a really strong relationship with all three of these words, and in my field, there's a lot of controversy, or was a lot of controversy about dependence and what that meant. So I'm just going to run it through very carefully. Use is, of course, your standard use of alcohol or whatever substances one uses recreationally. This is going to a party, this is having one drink at a bar, this is using alcohol in such a way that it's just part of one's life. Use means it's benign and there's nothing really to worry about. Abuse is when an individual begins to use their substance of choice to a level that they find themselves being beaten up by it regularly. That does not mean the individual is addicted to it. It doesn't mean that there's an ism in play. So, for example, we'll have folks who are binge drinkers, or we'll have folks who, so the family member is gone for the weekend, and so I'm not going to shave. I'm going to, I'm going to not take a shower for 3 days, and I'm just going to totally party. I'm going to do everything that I can't do when my family is around. That's a binge, but it's not necessarily ism or compulsion or the need to absolutely have the substance. And so a lot of times we'll see someone who is abusing their drugs of choice, and folks will say, you've got to be addicted to it. Or folks who have an addicted relationship to drugs or alcohol who are in recovery will look at someone else and they'll say, I remember using the way you're using now. You're in trouble, let me talk to you about that. Which is okay, but if the individual is only abusing, putting that one in air quotes, abusing the substance, that's different from being dependent upon the substance. So dependence is when the individual cannot get through a period of time without using it. In everything that I'm going to talk about for the next couple of hours, I'm talking about the physicality of requiring a substance. I'm talking about the psychology about requiring a substance. I'm talking about the spirituality of requiring a substance. And so initially with dependence, we're talking about the physicality of it. And this is when the body is so accustomed to receiving a portion of, and I'm going to use the word poison because alcohol is poison. Side note, The benefits of alcohol, when someone uses alcohol and they get that nice glow, they get that feeling in their body that's kind of warm and it feels good, and that kind of takes the edge off. That's the language that people use. That's what happens when the body receives alcohol and the body goes, oh, this is kind of, I'm going to have to, ooh, this is weird. And the body physically begins to attend to how to minimize the effects of that thing that's been entered into the system that changes one's experience. And so the body right away, all forces mobilize to destabilize, to nullify the impact of alcohol or drug of choice. So for a lot of non-alcoholics, that's enough, that's good. And they'll have one or two more, and then they get to that feeling of, oh, I don't feel so good. This isn't quite right for me. I'm going to stop here. And the individual with abuse and dependence tendencies says, yeah, this is exactly what I was looking for. Or, yeah, I don't feel so good right now, but in 3 more, I'm going to feel fine. So I just got to power through and have those 3 more, and then I'm going to be in a zone, that feels right and good to me. And so that's the stopping point for most people is, I don't feel so good, starting to slur my words a little bit. I definitely want to be able to drive home. I think I'll have a Diet Coke now, right? Or a Perrier or something like that. And so that is, quote, the normal relationship, end quote, with alcohol and substances. When we move further down the road of I've got to power through and get to this particular place with it, or this actually feels really good to me, right? This actually feels like, finally, I'm feeling normal. That's the other language that we often hear people say, is this is when I feel normal. When the rest of the world says, I've had enough, the person with dependence and abuse issues says, I'm finally starting to feel normal. So that's the relationship, the physicality of the relationship with drugs and alcohol. Again, a debate in my field, in the psychology world, the psychiatry world, is dependence. For a long time, we used to have the definition that dependence or ism was when the individual was going to go through withdrawal symptoms if they did not have their drug of choice or their substance of choice. Unfortunately, this generalized out to people saying, I don't want to take prescription medication because if I don't take my prescription medication, I'm going to have withdrawal symptoms. And so the fear was, can I become addicted to my antidepressant? Or can I become addicted to my blood thinner? Or can I become addicted to... And so then they would say, I'm addicted to Prozac, or I don't want to be addicted to my Wellbutrin because it takes 6 to 8 weeks for that to get out of my system safely if I don't choose to take that medication anymore. So we've had to shift our definition of dependence. The truth is, anything you put in your body has an impact on your body, and anything that leaves your body has an impact on your body. So that's the truth of everything that we ingest or take, or even prescription medications that we take for our health and well-being. The issue of dependence is, do I find myself not only in physical withdrawal, but I also struggle with showing up for my life? And what we find with prescribed medications, when an individual titrates down off of a prescribed medication, is that the body certainly is reacting, but the individual is able to show up for their life. And they're not depending on that medication in order to change their mood. On the other hand, with alcohol and other substances, the point of taking it is to change my mood. The point of taking it is to step out of my life. The point of taking it is anesthesia. So that when the individual stops using the drug of choice or the alcohol, their body has a reaction, but also their emotions have a reaction. So one of my favorite quotes of all time so far in the 30 years that I've been doing this work, I had a client who came into my office, and he was celebrating 40 days of sobriety. And he's sitting on the couch and he says, the hard thing about sobriety is not drinking. It's that life is just so realistic, you know? And I said, yeah, it is. Life is so realistic. And we laugh because, yes, it is. But his experience all along had been, it was kind of a show. It was kind of surreal. He was removed from it. He was distant from it. He could cue out. He could make himself black out for a period of time. There were things he didn't even remember. And so early recovery has to do with the body, and it has to do with how we experience the world. Life is so realistic. One of the main things we talk about in early recovery, my clients and I, is how do you manage your emotions? What do you do when you're frustrated with something? What do you do when your feelings get hurt? What do you do when someone is being such a jerk and you notice it now because you're not anesthetized or inebriated? Like, what do you do in that situation? And so showing up, living life on life's terms, is a big part of what it means to get away from a substance of choice when one is dependent upon it. I'm going to talk for a minute about the Jellinek curve. I don't know if you can see this. This is a chart that clinicians use, and we tend to hand it to clients, and we say, here's what you've been experiencing as a family or as an individual, and here's what we can expect going forward. Okay? So it starts with the occasional relief drinking, constant relief drinking comments, onset of memory and blackouts, increasing dependence of alcohol, feelings of guilt, memory of blackouts increase, right? I'm having more and more blackouts. A decrease of ability to stop drinking, grandiose and aggressive behavior, efforts to control fail repeatedly. Tries geographical escape, the geographical cure. If I leave my job, if I leave my relationship, if I leave my family, if I leave my town, I will feel better. The idea that it's not me, but this is also why in our culture we talk about wherever you go, there you are, right? That phrase that's been around for millennia, but we use it particularly right now for geographic cure. Wherever you go, there you are. Family and friends are avoided. Unreasonable resentments, because, if you guys had my life, you would drink too. Or I wish everybody would leave me alone. If everybody just got off my back, I would be okay. I wouldn't have to drink so much. There are ways that the individual begins to perceive the world, and there are ways that the individual begins to make excuses for themselves of, you guys are you're all just giving me such a hard time. You'd drink too if you were in my position. Moves down to impaired thinking, indefinable fears, obsession with drinking. And now we're all the way down here, the change phase. When we talk about yets, there's a big thing in the 12-step rooms where there are yets. I haven't lost a relationship yet. I haven't lost a job yet. I haven't gotten a DUI yet. I haven't had to yet. I haven't killed anybody yet. I haven't been in prison yet. I'm not dead yet. So there are 7 yets that we talk about. So when someone says to me, well, my wife thinks I should come in and talk to you about my drinking, but I don't have to because an alcoholic does these things and I've only done 3 of them. I haven't done the other ones. To which I smile lovingly and say, well, let's talk about those 3. I don't really care what the definition is of what we're working with. If it's impacted your life, if the definition, if the label is what's going to stop the conversation, I'm totally fine letting go of the label. It's, what is it like to live your life? What is it like to be inside of you? We get down to the change phase when the individual has had a lot of yets. They've had a lot of consequences. They're struggling with what it means to continue to use, and they don't know how to stop using at this point. Usually the individual says, I should drink less. And they'll set up their day or their life in such a way that they're not going to have access to their drug of choice. And then somehow by 7 o'clock at night or whenever it is, they've figured out how to have their drug of choice. So if you've ever been on a diet and you've said to yourself, I'm not supposed to have this particular food, right? And I can white knuckle my way through a 5 to 7 day period without that particular food, and then oops, it's a party, right? Or I've invited these people over, and by the way, I invited them on day 6 of my diet, and I've invited them over, but every time they come over, I have to serve this food, right? I mean, it wouldn't be a party. It would just be weird. It would be awkward if I didn't serve this food, because even though it's not on my diet, I'll serve it and I won't have it, right? Anybody else lived that? No. That's right? And so this is, whether it's alcohol or food, it's what we have the relationship with, and it's what we are denying ourselves. The relationship is what's important. So, obsessive drinking continues in vicious cycles, so the individual can spin out down here. They can go and go and go and go and go. And as we move back up into recovery, right? Rehabilitation is what this one says. The individual begins to experience psychoeducation. They learn more about alcohol and how it impacts their body. That's the first month when we do classic psychoeducation. Rehab, 21 to 28 day stay. The point of a rehab is I have enough time for it to get out of my body. There are predictable things that happen to the body for 21 to 28 days. And so we put people in a situation where they're not going to use and they're going to be buffered by programming, people, etc. And then we shove in a lot of psychoeducation. Here's what alcohol is. Here's what alcohol does to the body. Here's what the thought process is. Here's where spirituality is. Educate, 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 educate. Most people don't hear the first 2 weeks of education. They just don't hear it. Because their body is trying to figure out, their mind, their psyche, their neurochemistry is all trying to hit a reset. And so the first 14 to 21 days, the individual doesn't hear very much. But that last week of treatment is when they really begin to hear a lot of psychoeducation. And what happens next is they're released into the world. Usually they've been going to some 12-step meetings, and they'll tell us whether they like the 12-step meetings or not. Sometimes people come out of treatment and they're like, I don't like them, I'm not going. All people do is complain. What's important is we started with psychoeducation. And early recovery can cycle through an awful lot also. It can cycle through and cycle through and cycle through. Where we move out of that first 4 to 6 week period is when the individual begins to find out that life is so realistic. And then the next phase is, how do I live with my feelings? And by the way, usually week 8 to 12, consequences are flying in the door. Right? Consequences are hitting right and left. Families feel like they can finally begin to tell you what they think about you and what it's been like to live with you. DUIs come into play, court sessions come into play, work. Employers will begin to say you haven't been showing up for your job or you need to do something differently. And so here they are in this brand new, dried out period. Vulnerable, raw, what do you do with your feelings? Life is so realistic, and consequences are flying at me. And so this is why folks will begin to use again, or they'll say to themselves, well, I haven't had anything for the last 8 to 12 weeks. I know better now. I've gotten all of this psychoeducation. I'll just have 1 or 2. And a mistake that's in the lay world is folks will say, your first drink will kill you. The first drink, the 1 drink and you're off to the races is the phrase that we use. What is not accurate about that is any good enemy never attacks on the same flank twice. So the ism, the illness, the disease process, knows to go underground. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about the physicality of this. It knows to go underground. And because the individual's been told 1 and you're off to the races, the individual knows, I need to defend against the off to the races. I'll have 1 and I'll be okay. And so 1, 2, I was fine. Everybody said I was going to get into trouble. I didn't get into trouble. I can 1 or 2, I can do that. In a week, next Saturday, I'll have another 1 or 2. And usually within a 30-day period, the individual is back to where they were before they went into treatment. And then it's like, wow, this thing is different. And it's harder to abstain the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time. And that's usually when we have someone who is hitting bottom, and we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But coming up to rehabilitation, the individual begins to learn about realistic thinking. We address polarized thinking. There's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. There's only one outcome here that I can possibly see. My way, it hasn't worked for me, but I don't know any other ways. We begin to work with people on their relationship strategies, and we work with them on the concept that there is something greater than themselves. So the idea of whether that's God, or whether that's fate, or the fact that the sun comes up and the sun goes down, or the seasons change over and over and over again, there's something that's reliable and predictable that's bigger than the individual. And that is really important for recovery from alcoholism. If the individual has been relying on alcohol or their substance of choice in order to get through, that's a higher power. That is a power that is greater than the individual. And so a portion of work here is for the individual to shift over from this finite power that is greater than the individual to something that is bigger, larger, more productive. We'll talk about that also in a bit, because our resolutions say we've got to address the spirituality of what it means to use. The first steps toward economic instability, there are a lot of things that we talk about. So just like there are a lot of yets for getting into trouble, right? I haven't had a DUI yet. There's also a lot of yets for recovery. I don't know how to handle this situation. Or we're coming up into Thanksgiving. I have no idea how to deal with my family of origin. Or what do you do with Wednesday night? Does everybody know that Wednesday night is one of the top drinking nights of the entire year? Preparing the turkey, that's when a lot of people are like drinking tons and tons and tons and tons and tons. So a lot of times folks will report to me that the reason that their Thanksgiving dinner doesn't happen until 5 or 6 o'clock at night is because everybody passed out. And so it just becomes a family tradition. So, okay, if I'm entering my first Thanksgiving, I don't know how to do that sober, and I don't know how to deal with my family, and what do you do with that? And the benefit of having other people to talk to is, well, here's how you could try it, or this is what it looks like, or here's some things that I've done that make it manageable. The ability to reach out beyond one's pod, one's sanctuary of isolation, as terrifying as that is, it is so important to be able to do that and say, how do you do this? Even more terrifying, will you come with me? Even more terrifying, can I go with you? Do I have to go to my family? Do I have to do what I always do? So let's talk about physical needs when it comes to alcohol use, or again, substance of choice. The resolutions have asked us to talk mostly about alcohol, but they've also said there's a gamut of substances that we can use. And so, as I said earlier, same wrapper, different candy, right? Whatever the substance is, pot, alcohol, methamphetamines, cocaine, name it, the ritual of use is different, but the point of use is the same across the board. So the ritual is what needs to be addressed in order for the individual to have a different way of walking in the world. But all ism has to do with who am I connected to? How do I make it through my day? What am I connected to that's larger than myself? And what's my point? What's the point of living in this world, that existential piece? So the physical use, with use, not a lot of physical need. I had a drink or two, it was great, I had that nice warm feeling, I was able to disengage from my daily life, I'm good. But when it comes to abuse, physical use is, I drank to the point, past the point of comfort for my body. I'm going to wake up with a hangover. I'm going to wake up maybe with a blackout or a brownout or a whiteout, depending on the substance. I'm going to have something that I have to recover from. I did too much last night, or I do too much regularly, but I don't need it. If I have to go on a vacation, for example, and I'm not able to drink for 2 weeks, I'm fine with that. My body does not have a reaction to that. However, when we come to dependence and physical needs, the individual will tell me that they've got to have a certain drink at a certain time. So the hair of the dog, did you start off the day with the hair of the dog? So a lot of people will think that the hair of the dog, drinking alcohol in the morning, is a way of getting rid of the hangover, when actually the hangover at this stage of the game is the body says, I've got to have this. It's not just I am too dehydrated and I need some more oxygen in my brain cells and I need to regenerate, I need to reorganize my internal world. It's no, at this stage of the game, I haven't had anything for 4 hours. I have to have something now or I'm going to start to go into withdrawals. I'm going to have DTs. I'm going to begin to see things on the wall. I'm going to begin to vomit to the point that I might be in trouble. Emotional needs. Interpersonal needs. This slide, by the way, is one of the more powerful slides. You don't know it because there's only like 5 bullet points on it. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about the resolution and can we have the conversation with each other. I've been salting everything I've said with anesthesia, with being able to tolerate social anxiety, with managing relationships. How do you deal with feelings? Interpersonal connection. Every one of us needs to belong. So I always say we're mammals, which means that we have a herd mentality, H-E-R-D. All of us, introvert or extrovert, doesn't matter. We need to have a circle of people that we are with or that we attend to. Sometimes church is the only thing that an individual with a substance use makes themselves get to on a Sunday. All of the other interactions of the week are things that they can avoid or that they're able to opt away from. For a lot of people, church is one of the places, the golf course, those places where other people are, where I know I'm going to be with my own people, where I'm safe. The concept of church as a safe place, the building is safe and known. How many of you have ever talked with anybody who says, I don't really care about the clergy, but the building? Or we will live with Father, Mother, so-and-so for 5 more years, and then we'll get a new priest, but the building is what matters, right? The building is what the attachment is to. That is important. Where do we find our attachment? For the individual who has a substance use, the attachment might be to the bottle of Tanqueray, or it might be to what the advertisement tells me I'm going to get when I drink a certain kind of tequila. Or it might be that my dealer tells me that this particular strain of whatever it is going to give me a particular experience, and I'm attached to that experience. We human beings are attached. We are made to worship something, whether that's each other, or a substance, or a god, or a handheld device, or a certain feed from Huffington Post. We are made to attend to something. And so interpersonal needs, emotional needs, who am I? Am I a good girl? Am I a bad girl? Am I of value? Did you laugh at my joke? Do you care that I had a hard time? If you had the life I have, you would drink too. Says, I'm in so much pain, and anesthesia is the thing that matters more to me. I don't know how to manage that thing that causes me so much pain. So I need to be numbed out. Most alcoholics are not thinking to themselves, I need to be numbed out. But that's the language that they're going to be using in order to rationalize the use. Social anxiety versus social comfort. I cannot tell you the number of people come into my office and they say, I have so much social anxiety, and when I was drinking, I never paid any attention to it. But then it turns out I've had social anxiety my whole life. And my first question is, what was the age of your first drink? Usually I'm going to hear 11, 12, sometimes 4, sometimes 18, sometimes 21. The ones who have their first drink at 18 to 21 have already learned a number of social situations, a way of managing social situations. They don't have a lot of social anxiety. But the ones who start drinking in middle school or early high school have learned, they've missed out on all of that learning. I don't know if you guys remember middle school and high school. But that is 2 buildings in which we sequester young ones. So I always say middle school, we put you in that building for those 3 years, and then you guys figure stuff out, and then we bring you out of that building, because you all have figured out how to manage your changing bodies and how to manage your changing relationships. And, but there's a reason, I would say to my daughter, there's a reason we put you in that building for 3 years. We just remove you from society because we love you. And because they are engaging with each other in an amazing way. They are engaging and they are learning. High school is all about firsts, right? My first boyfriend, girlfriend, my first time that I figured out something that matters to me, my first sport, my first experience of getting cut from a sport, my first. If we have an individual who's binge drinking on the weekends, or who is taking someone else's Adderall so that they can concentrate, or remember something for an exam, they're learning how to socialize while anesthetized. They don't learn how to socialize socially. So almost every single addict or alcoholic, when we remove the substance of choice, is left with, what do you do with that awkward situation and there's no guacamole dip to stand next to? What do you do? Or what do you do when someone's mad at you? Or what do you do when you don't have anything interesting to say and everybody's going to turn and talk to someone else, but I need to be connected to someone? What do you do with those social situations? And so the short answer is, I will teach you. We will all teach you how to do this. But social anxiety versus social comfort, it feels so much better being anesthetized. So the other way to think about this is, did anybody have a thumb that they sucked, or a stuffed animal, or a blanket that they carried around? And today in adulthood, we do it with jewelry, or crosses, or collars, or coffee mugs, or there's something that we all refuse to leave the house without. Or, I'm sure that all of you, there's something that if you accidentally leave the house without it, you actually turn your car around to go get. So for me, I have silver worry beads that my brother-in-law gave me 20-some years ago, and they've been with me every day for the last 20-some years. And occasionally, when I change purses, it won't make it, or I'll leave the house without a purse and I haven't put them in my pocket, I will go home. I will be later than my usual 5 to 10 minutes. And that's one where I don't ever say, I had to go back and get my worry beads. I had to do it. That's my lovey. That's my transitional object. That's the thing that lets me know that I'm okay. And so here's the other piece. I know that a lot of folks have talked sometimes about if only God had skin, right? So God is everywhere, and God loves me, and God is with me. Okay, but if God had skin, I could hug God. or God could hug me, or I could climb into God's lap, or, any of those things, that we human beings seek the ability to touch. We seek the ability to be impacted. Each of us is going to talk at dinner tonight, or whatever family meal you're going to share, about what your day was like, or you're going to talk to your sponsors, or you're going to have a conversation with someone. And here's how I was impacted. And oh, by the way, here's how I think I impacted other people. Could be that I'm the only one who's going to do that. But that's how we get into the world. That's what we do. And so there's social comfort and social anxiety with that, but there's also the spiritual need. So Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious. That was the language that he used to talk about God. But it was also the language that he used to say that we're all connected to each other, that we read each other's nonverbal communication, or that we all have an electrical impulse running through our bodies, and our electrical impulses feed off of each other's. And sometimes that's the spiritual zone that we feel. When one is drinking or drugging, when one is using a substance of choice, that feeling is in the body, even if the individual is isolated, shut down, sitting in the dark, watching television with their bottle in their hand. And there's no one else around. So this is why the spirituality of not using is one of the most important parts of recovery. Again, one of the reasons I'm thrilled that a church resolution is, let's talk about the spirituality of recovery. Let's talk about what it's like to have to rely on fellow human beings, or to talk about what it's like to live without any anesthesia, so that my being is stuck in this meat case, and I'm not really able to connect the way I need to connect. And intellectually, in my early recovery, as my brain is healing, I have to take for granted that there might be something out there. And it's why in the 12-step rooms they talk a lot about let the group be your higher power. Or we're going to give you a coin to commemorate your 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 12 months recovery, so that you have something physical to hold on to. Use the phone list, text, make sure that we're all in touch with each other, is a way of helping to establish the beginning of a spiritual connection. We don't use that language. We say camaraderie, we say fellowship, but that's the beginning of a spiritual connection. When someone comes into church and they say to me, Dr. Perrin, I don't have to work any of those spiritual things because I go to church. I'm a good Christian. The work there is often, well, can you be a good Christian, putting that one in quotes, with all the behaviors that go with that, and live without your drug of choice and practice faith? We are best equipped here to talk about faith. We are best equipped here to talk about what is it like to live without that thing that makes you feel comfortable, without that transitional object. How do we help you have a transitional object here? We will talk about that in a bit. Talking about family dynamics. So again, the first thing about recovery is abstaining from one's drug of choice. Well, when I've abstained from my drug of choice, then I'm left with having to deal with my family without anesthesia. Okay? And I'm left with having to deal with my work environment and my everything else. And so when we talk about that one resolution where it says we need to know if the nominee or postulant, or fill in the next label, has a family member or has addiction in their family, the next piece is, what have I been taught to do? How have I been taught to manage my emotional life? So there's the physicality of it goes into my body, and my body responds to it a certain way, and eventually my body it demands to have alcohol or my substance of choice. It demands to use it, because if it doesn't have it, I'm going to be physically uncomfortable. So we remove it, and the individual abstains, and then they figure out how to live in their body. But then they're left with, well, what did I learn? If as a little one, I learned that you make it through a really hard work day and you wait for that 5 o'clock whistle and you come home and my dad goes straight to the bar. Instead of saying hello to us or giving my mother a kiss hello or anything like that, he goes straight to the bar and he pours himself one and he chugs it back and he feels like, I've made it. And then he can start to sip something all night long. What have I learned as a little girl? I've learned that the reward for getting through a really good day is something that changes my experience. That's the reward. If I see that mom and dad manage their anger with each other by not connecting with each other, but by going and drinking in their separate rooms, what have I learned? If I watch my father manage my other parents' substance use issues by constantly obsessing about what they're doing, how much they're drinking, what's going on with them, and I learn to obsess about someone else's behavior, that's what I've learned. Monkey see, monkey do. Little ones they're not tabula rasa. We don't believe that anymore. But they watch us and they incorporate everything that we teach them to do. So part of the family disease component of this is not only that everybody is affected by it, but everybody's got their role. So Claudia Black did some amazing work in the 70s about the family system of alcoholism. And whenever she would do a presentation, she always had a mobile that would be behind her with big pieces. And part of the work that she would do is she would say, well, if you remove something like someone's use behavior, and you take that out of the mobile, and she would pull it off the mobile, and the mobile would just gyrate. It would try very much to find a place of equilibrium, and finally the mobile would find a place of equilibrium, but it would be so completely off-center, off-kilter, that it was not beautiful and it was not a good mobile anymore. And she said, all we need to do is put this one piece back into the mobile, and the mobile will set the way it's supposed to set. So what I will often hear sometimes is that the individual will be working in my office on not drinking or drugging or using. They'll get sober and the families will get mad at them. And they'll be like, why can't you go back to drinking? You're no fun. You are no fun. I don't understand why you can't be this way. We don't know how to relate to you anymore. And the recovering alcoholic says, I don't know how to relate to you guys either. We've got to figure this out. And the answer is, well, if you just go back to drinking just a little bit. I had a client who came home early from a camping trip because his wife had brought 3 12-packs to the camping grounds because she knew that if he did not drink, she would not have a good time. So he got in the car and he drove to a motel, he rented a car, blah, 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 got himself back, came into my office. I walked to my office, he's sitting on the floor outside of my office saying, she wants me to drink more than she wants me to be sober. And he'd gone into a whole bunch of situations that were very bad for him before he went into rehab. So for him it was life and death. I must not drink. But my family doesn't know what to do with me if I don't drink. So what the resolution forgets is the impact of the family having expectations that you be a certain way. Just don't drink, but still be fun. Just don't drink, but don't change anything else. We don't need to look at the dynamics in our house. We don't need to look at anything else that's going on. What we have the ability to give people, if we're listening and mindful and we're attending to them, is let me love you as you figure out who you are. That's what early recovery is. Let me love you while we figure out who you are. So, anesthesia. Anesthesia. We are a society that really likes to avoid. We need to be numb. We're constantly looking for that next thing that's going to numb us out. Currently, we are all looking at our phones. Currently, that is the most visible thing that we use to numb ourselves out, to disengage. And we say that we're trying to engage, but most people feel less engaged than they have ever felt. Most people feel lonelier than they have ever felt. And most people are constantly seeking an attachment connection to their wristwatch or their phone or their device. Again, we are made to be connected to something larger than ourselves, and the internet is a good thing for some. Anesthesia, what do I do with my feelings? What do I do with the fact that my body hurts? What do I do with the fact that my joints hurt? I have clients who will stop drinking and they will come in and they'll say, I'm sure I have arthritis. 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, their body hurts. Docs won't give them any prescription for it. They say, this is just what it is to be in a body. So did anybody ever read the Vampire Lestat books by Anne Rice? In the 5th book, when Lestat is suddenly forced to become a human being, through all sorts of things that happen in her books, she writes the most brilliant chapter about what it is to inhabit a human body. And when her work was fresh and new back in the 80s, I would have clients bring that into my office and they would read this chapter. This is what it's like to be in early recovery. This chapter, where he talks about suddenly being aware of things in his body and his arms that he'd never been aware of before, joints hurting, needs that he can't even name in his body, and then, oh, that's what it means to be hungry. It's that primitive, it's that raw. So when I use anesthesia, I'm not necessarily using it descriptively. Substances attack the brain, they attack the neurochemistry, they attack the synaptic clefts, the ways that we communicate, the way cells communicate with each other in our brain. That's anesthesia. And then if I have this nice warm glow, or I'm constantly off, kilter in some way, what is it like to be in a body that's not off kilter? You need to know this so that when you begin to have some of these conversations with folks, when you say, I think you should stop drinking, this is what you're asking them to do. This is what you're asking them to do. And so it is a huge commitment to stop drinking and drugging. So let's talk about church policy. Let's talk about what does it mean to try to hold a party or a fundraiser at church, and someone comes in and they're inebriated, and you think they shouldn't be. Now, I just used some flammable language there. You think they shouldn't be. And of course, the conversation of the day is, how are we going to have this conversation with someone? What I want you to know, I'm front-loading this with, you need to understand what it's like for the individual to choose not to drink. And they know, by the way, that this is what they're choosing, this is what they're opting into if they don't drink. Their body feels foreign, their social situations are agonizing, they feel alone and bereft, there is too much time in the day, and how on the earth do you connect with people, and what do you do with how realistic life is? All of that is what's managed by the individual coming to church, inebriated, or just in a zone, or whatever that looks like. What is the policy that you have in place in your parish on overindulgence or on limiting alcohol use? We're back to the beginnings of that conversation of what does it mean to host an event with or without alcohol? Are there problem drinkers that are managed privately and socially in your congregation? Everybody, all of you, are going to be able to name 1 or 5 people that you know needs to be attended to at church when you have a function of some kind, or who will not come because they will overindulge, or who will not come because you're not serving alcohol. They are identified. These are also the folks, if you're in leadership, these are also the folks that are going to need to talk to you regularly. They're the phone calls that you avoid. They're the phone calls that make you feel anxious, or the ones that you make at the end of your day because you know that they're going to take the most time. So all of us in this very human connection that we have in the parishes and churches have to do with how we relate to each other. So who are the problem drinkers that are managed privately or publicly? Privately means that the family has figured out how to keep them away from a party, or the family member is going to be standing next to them trying to keep them from drinking too much at the party, or the community knows we've got to begin to separate so-and-so from their alcohol use, from their alcohol in this particular event. And then what is in place to manage liability? If someone leaves your church, the physicality, the building, and they are inebriated and should not be driving, and you were serving alcohol, who holds liability? Well, the drinker does, but so does the church. So does the church. So one of the conversations, other than what was happening in our world and the General Convention, that Sandy and I were having was, who's responsible for the car crash? And how do we work on the liability issues there? These are some ways to begin to have the conversation with your leadership in your parishes. These 3 questions are going to open up so many doors, so many ways of talking about our relationship with alcohol or anything else. Let's see. Can you guys see this? These are the reasons that we don't confront someone. And they all boil down to, because I'm uncomfortable confronting you. That's what they all boil down to. Not my business, not my problem, not my job. I don't know how to do it well. Call Dr. Perrin, she's better at it. Not my call. Hey, they can drive their life into a rut. I don't, it's not my life. Not my calling, right? I'm just not good at it. We're back to that one. Not my family, not my responsibility, not my fault. Not worth my help. That person is a jerk. And, they are immoral and unethical, and I can't stand them, so they're not worth it. Not worth saving. I'm not my brother's keeper. I am not my brother's keeper. We're Americans. We're all cowboys in the Wild West. Right? We all take care of ourselves. We all don't want anybody to tell us what to do or how to do it. We all live in our own personal echo chamber in our social media world. Don't tell me what to do. But what each one of these things says is, I am so uncomfortable with how you're going to respond to me. I am so uncomfortable with the pushback you're going to give me. So I'm not going to do it. Let me come back to this for just a minute. The other piece here is, how many of you, do not raise your hands, I don't want to know. How many of you have thought, I need to confront so-and-so? And then you've thought, but they know this about me, this thing, whatever it is. Which means that they're going to discount what I have to say, or they're going to pull it up in my face. Oh yeah, well what about you? Or worse, I have spent time partying with them. I don't do it as far or as badly, I'm not addicted to it, but they are. So they might even say, you're one to talk. What about that night that we ba-ba-ba-ba-ba? There are some really brilliant ways that our reaching out, our attempt to talk with someone about what's going on in their lives, gets pushed back with, here's why you have no standing, no feet to stand on. You can't push back, right? How dare you say that to me? So we're going to be talking in the third hour about how to address some of these and how to step forward and say, I know that there's this thing that I do that is, it sounds like it's as bad as what you do, but I've really got to talk with you about what you do. Or, yeah, we partied together, but I did not pick up anything the next day or for the next 4 months because I didn't need to, but you picked up 2 hours after I dropped you off at home. And that is a problem. Okay. So the impact on systems, there are two ways to look at this slide. One is how substance dependence shuts down a system. The other one is how substance dependence forces a system to engage in a certain way. So a little bit ago I said, I'm sure that you've got 1, 2, 5 people that come to mind when you think about the conversations we're talking about and how to manage that individual's acting out behavior. And the system has to make choices based on that individual. We are definitely not going to be able to have that party because so-and-so can't tolerate that. Or we are definitely going to have that party and someone's going to have to be assigned to Uncle Joe, whoever that is. The family system also pushes to keep that engagement, pushes to keep that relationship strong with the individual and their substance of choice. I even told you the story about the wife in the tent. Their marriage was over, by the way. It ended that night. But it ended because he was clear that he needed to survive, and he knew that if he was going to keep drinking the way he was drinking, he would definitely die of cirrhosis of the liver, or he would die in a car crash, or he would kill himself. And so his wife appearing with 3 12-packs of alcohol to get him through the weekend, when he hadn't had anything to drink for 4 months, and he was no fun, was a pretty powerful statement to him about how she viewed his well-being. Now to her, this had nothing to do with how she viewed his well-being. She was trying to save her marriage. He was a jerk. He was a jerk. And at least when he drank, he would pass out. And then she wouldn't have to deal with him, and she could manage the house, and she could manage the kids. And as long as he stayed in his room, drinking, drugging, passed out, she was able to run the household the way it needed to be run. Things got done. Well, when he was sober, he kept showing up and trying to help her because his sponsor would say, go help your wife. Well, it got in the way. So for her, it wasn't about his well-being. She loved him, wanted him to be fine. But for her, it was he gets in the way, and he's a jerk because he has no social skills, and he's uncomfortable, and he doesn't say the right thing, and he's resentful. Can you hear the difference in perspective? So family system, I think about parishes as family systems, regardless of the size of the parish. I know that we name, it's the family-sized parish and the blah, blah, blah size parish. Any system that is functioning together where we all bump against each other like pinballs in a pinball machine, we are having a relationship with each other regardless of the size. And we kind of go into smaller groups, we go into subgroups when we've got a larger parish, but the truth is there's a family system in play here. And the family system has to change as much and intimately as the active alcoholic who's looking at sobriety. I'll say that again. The family system has to change as much and as intimately as the person they're asking not to use. When we ask someone not to use, one of the ways they stay not using, one of the ways they stay sober is they have to do that exploration of self. Who am I? What do I need? What are the things that I absolutely cannot tolerate, and how do I work my life in such a way that I can stay away from those things or figure out how to manage them? How do I figure out how to move forward 24/7? How do I figure out how to be in uncomfortable situations? What do I do when life is too realistic and I don't have anything beyond tolerating the event to get past the event? Systems are in the same struggle. What do we do with this person now who's showing up? What do we do with this person now that we have to take care of in a different way? We have to suddenly stop and think about why we do things, how we do them. We might have to change what we're doing, why we do them, how we do them, in order to make this a viable situation for the person we're supposed to be loving. Systems have to change as intimately and profoundly. They have to become sober also. Sober for a system does not mean the system can't use alcohol. Sober is about emotional maturity. Sober is about emotional behavioral choices, mature behavioral choices. Sobriety is about managing uncomfortable situations by acknowledging, I'm uncomfortable here, but we're all in a situation together. Sobriety is about those things. Abstaining is about not using. Anybody can not use for a period of time. Sobriety is, can I move into a mature, engaged way of being? Being with me, being with you, being with the system. So when we're talking about someone not drinking or drugging, we're talking about an individual getting sober and the system doesn't change or the system doesn't do the work. The individual will not be able to survive long in the system, and the system will create more and more people who are abstaining or getting anesthetized. Same thing with communities, work life and parish life. In my world, all of those are systems, all of those are family systems. In the slide, I gave you 4 bullet points, but I want you to think about the family system in all 4 realms. So intervention, we've got just a couple more slides and then we're going to take a break for lunch. Intervention, these are the questions that we ask ourselves, and this is what we're going to be talking about in the 3rd hour. Should we intervene? And the cost-benefit analysis of what it means to intervene for someone. Sometimes the cost-benefit analysis means what is the impact on the system, what is the impact on how we run our lives, what is the impact on the individual, but the other one is what is the impact on the individual's family, children, spouse, what is the impact? Should we intervene? How do we intervene? How? So a lot of times systems will say, well, we can't do it ourselves. We're going to go find someone who can do it for us. We're going to call Dr. Perrin. Dr. Perrin will say no, because Dr. Perrin doesn't have a relationship with that individual. And it is much more powerful when the individual hears, this is what it's like to love you. Or, I can't love you anymore. I cannot. My feelings of affection and closeness with you are gone because these things happened. And it is not safe for me to be vulnerable enough with you to hold that for you. Or, I cannot think of you as your best self, which is what we do when we love each other. I cannot think of you as your best self anymore because I've been disappointed so many times. What type of intervention? Well, is it where the entire parish talks with the individual? Is it when leadership talks with the individual? Is it when family and friends come together in a priest's office or a deacon's office and talk about what it's like to live with you? Is it when we wait for work for the individual to be fired or laid off or required to go to treatment before they can come back to work? What type of intervention? And people wait for an individual to hit rock bottom. Those of us who love someone who's drinking and drugging themselves to death, they'll hit they'll hit some event that is really bad. And those of us on the outside will say, surely that's bad enough, that they will figure out that they should not be drinking or drugging. Surely, because it would be for me. I'm saying if I got a DUI, it would be for me enough to figure out I should not be drinking and driving, okay? So if it's enough for me, surely my friend, my beloved who is drinking and drugging, that'll be enough for them too. So we stand off on the side and we say, That's a bottom. And maybe even the individual says, this is bad. It's never been this bad. I can promise to you that I have hit bottom. Well, here's why it's a myth. At the bottom of every bottom is a trapdoor. At the bottom of every bottom is a shovel to dig a little bit deeper. And so one of the things I say to clients and anybody else who comes to talk to me is, can this bottom be as deep as you go? So at every bottom of a bottom is a trapdoor or a shovel. And here, I don't know if you can hear it or not, but we're moving into the 6 feet deep, buried alive analogy. Death is at the end of this. Whether it's the user's death or the death of someone that they're in care of or the death of someone that they hit while they're driving their car. How deep does a bottom need to be? So my definition of a bottom, Dr. Perrin's definition of a bottom is, it is that moment in time when the individual realizes, I am uncomfortable, in pain, and facing all sorts of consequences if I keep doing what I've been doing. And if I change what I've been doing and do what everybody's asked me to do, which is not drink and drug, I am faced with discomfort and pain and consequences. The difference is, if I keep using, I know what that looks like, I know how it feels. And if I stop using, I don't know what that feels like, and I don't know how it feels, and I don't know how long it will be. I leave a place of predictability, even if it's predictably unpredictable, and I face myself toward a new way of living that I have no idea what that's going to look like. A bottom is less about going down and more about, am I willing to be uncomfortable in a different way? It is unfair for us, those of us who aren't choosing whether to use or not, it is unfair for us to say it will get better, because it won't at first. It will not get better at first. And it is unfair for us to say, you are going to feel so much better, we're going to like you better, and you're going to, don't worry, you just stop drinking and drugging and it'll all work out. It is unfair. It is more important that we say, you're going to be uncomfortable no matter what. And eventually you will figure out how to live this way, and it'll get better, because it will. And you'll feel better and you'll know how to handle it. But a bottom is, I'm going to be uncomfortable no matter what. Maybe the way I've been using, the way my life has been hitting a bottom is so profound that I know I can't go there anymore. But this is a moment of desperation. Can I go to this next way of living, trying not to drink and drug? So treatment options, we're going to talk more about this after lunch. I talked about psychoeducation the first 21 to 28 days of any process, whether the individual is inpatient, outpatient, or drying out in their bedroom. It's the first 21 to 28 days is my body adapts and I begin to have my faculties that come back. I begin to be able to think, I can see cause and effect, I can see how things are improving. Psychoeducation. 12-step rooms are an organic treatment for growing up, for managing attachment issues, for learning how to be social. They're beautiful rooms, not for everybody, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I can tell you that of all the research, the folks who go into 12-step rooms and figure out how to live according to that, they stay sober longer. Relapse is huge with addiction, huge. And one of the questions at the earlier break was, if the individual stops using alcohol, are there co-addictions? Are there other places that people can go for, to get addicted to something else? And the answer is absolutely, because the structure is already there. So one of the things I talk about with my clients is having an addiction is like being on the Titanic. And we usually have 3 of them analogously. Usually there are 3 types of addictions that we have. So the first one is the one that's going to kill me. So that might be my cocaine use or my alcohol use. I'm going to lose all sorts of things. On the Titanic, that means that I can feel that the water is, hip high. So I'm smart, and I leave that room and I say, I'm not going to drink anymore. And I crawl up the hall to where the carpet is damp, and I find another stateroom, and I say, well, this one, the water's only up to my ankle. This is my second drug of choice, usually. I stay there and I use my second drug of choice while not drinking, and I'm sober because I'm not drinking. But I've got this second thing that I'm using, and I'm okay with it because the water's just up to my ankle. Well, sometimes the water comes up to my knee, and then it goes back down to my ankle, and then sometimes the water comes up, and then eventually it's like, oh, it's just above my knee. I know what happens if I stay in this room. It will come up to my hip. I should leave this stateroom now. And the individual tries to figure out how not to use that second drug of choice. They crawl up the hallway and they go into a third stateroom. Usually this one is relationships, attachment issues, how I'm going to get along with other people, what I need and don't need in a relationship. And I give myself too much or too little to a relationship and I end up feeling invisible or depleted. And that one, the water's just around my toes, the carpet is damp, and the individual says, I don't need to stay for this show. I have my 12-step rooms for AA. I have my 12-step rooms for my second drug of choice. I can have a different relationship with people. And that's when people get off the Titanic. So what I've just done here is I've done psychoeducation, I've talked about 12-step, and I've talked about what it means for the individual to live through a period of time of not using their drugs of choice. This is the whole onion analogy. So when you are referring people, when we get to this third hour, we're at lunchtime, I promise. And we talk about what's next after we have our conversation and you try not to drink and drug, or the individual says, where should I go, what should I do? This is what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to stop for a couple of questions and we're going to have lunch for about a half an hour, and then we'll come back for our third hour.